Let's move on to our main story tonight, which concerns TikTok, the social media app many are addicted to thanks to its cooking tutorials, dances that are impossible for anyone born before 1985 to look cool doing, and masterpieces like this.
There is truly nothing I love more than watching this man's videos and guessing what he's making. Okay. Oh, like a submarine. Totally a snake. Got it.
What a journey! And honestly, I don't know how TV is supposed to compete with that. I'd absolutely watch that guy host a game show titled Dick or Snake. It's basically, is it cake, only with significantly higher snake-on-dick injuries? TikTok is massively popular. It has more than 1 billion users worldwide and 170 million monthly active users in the US, with fully a third of US adults and a majority of those under 30 using it. All of which makes it pretty remarkable that it may be on the brink of going away. Because you might have forgotten with everything else going on this year, but in April, this happened.
This morning, the clock begins ticking down for TikTok after the Senate last night passed a bill giving the social media platform's Chinese parent company an ultimatum: sell the app or be banned in the U.S. Lawmakers in both parties say TikTok poses a serious national security risk.
It's true, TikTok could be banned by January 19th because it's a security threat, which sounds frightening, even if those claims were made under footage of this orange furball going to town on its own feet. We cannot let the Chinese get their hands on our private data, like how often Dr. Tunafish here gives himself the full Tarantino. The point is, Congress came down on TikTok hard, and when that law passed, with broad bipartisan support, by the way, TikTok's users were not thrilled.
An army of young TikTok rebels are taking a break from viral dance crazes and challenges and coming together to stop the government from taking away their favorite social media platform. They're using their phones to actually make phone calls to members of Congress.
Do not ban TikTok. That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable.
I'm an 18-year-old girl in Michigan. What am I going to do for China? Take my information. I don't care.
OK. That is an amazing reaction. Take my information, I don't care. My address is 2443 Emerson Place. My blood type is A positive, and I think my dad did tax fraud. Now what, China? I don't give a shit. But think about it, Congress made teenagers so mad they made actual phone calls. That is dedication. Teens hate doing that. If you ever need to scare one, just hand them a ringing phone and say, "It's for you." But that reaction probably shouldn't be surprising. People love TikTok, and not just as a place to watch a guy watching a guy make a giant chocolate dick snake. Nearly 40% of adults under 30 say they regularly get their news from TikTok, and it's a significant driver of business, given that more than 7 million small businesses use it. And yet, some lawmakers insist it's also among the biggest threats facing our nation.
TikTok is a grave national security threat to Americans.
TikTok is just Chinese malware. It's just junk food for our brains.
It is spyware. It is being weaponized.
TikTok is a gun aimed at Americans' heads.
Yeah, those are some strong words, because we all know Congress will not stand by and watch someone pointing a metaphorical gun at Americans' heads. Actual guns, that's a complicated issue for some reason, but metaphorical gun violence will not stand. So if an app this popular is supposedly such a dire threat, tonight, let's look at TikTok. Who's behind it, what the concerns are, and what this might really be all about, because this story is actually a lot more nuanced than you might think. And let's start with the fact that TikTok's had a meteoric rise. It's owned by ByteDance, a Chinese company who first made a similar app for the Chinese market called Douyin back in 2016. The next year, they launched TikTok as the international version, then purchased an app called Musical.ly with a pre-existing user base in the US, merging the two in 2018 to create the app we know today. But TikTok's breakout moment was the pandemic, when all of a sudden, many of us were stuck at home with nothing to do but learn how to make cloud bread, whip up coffee, and try to master the savage dance. It is genuinely hard to imagine a better scenario for TikTok to thrive in than a pandemic. Suddenly they had a captive audience whose only other entertainment options were getting into sourdough, Windexing groceries a third time, or, of course, retreating into a blank void where they slowly went insane. I'm fine now. Don't worry, I'm fine now. But lawmakers were already raising alarms about TikTok being Chinese-owned, and by mid-2020, Trump signed an executive order banning it. saying TikTok would be shut down unless Microsoft or another company purchased it from ByteDance. That never wound up happening, as a court found that Trump had overstepped in trying to ban it by executive order. And in the years since, TikTok's been at pains to publicly distance itself from China. It launched something called Project Texas, where they basically promised to store US users' data on US servers maintained by a third-party US company, which might sound good, but there are real questions about how effective that has been, with one worker saying the data protections amount to basically a wink and a nod. Meanwhile, they've launched a PR push with ads leaning hard into Americana, like in this one, featuring a veteran named Patriotic Kenny.
My scooter broke down. I went into a depression.
How do you feel about that?
Pretty sad.
And I posted it to show that Kenny's not always happy. Within 24 hours, people had donated over $5,000.
Oh, you're kidding.
And within a week, people had donated $110,000. And Kenny hit 1 million followers.
It has changed my life tremendously.
None of this would have happened without TikTok.
Wow. I don't know what's more American there, Kenny's taste in home decor, or the fact he had to go viral on social media to get access to basic medical equipment. Although, to be clear, TikTok didn't buy Kenny a scooter, other people did. It's a bit like having people put money in a jar for charity, then thanking the jar. None of this could have happened without you, jar. Truly, you are the best of us. But despite those efforts, concern about China's influence over TikTok continue to grow, culminating in the law passed earlier this year demanding it be sold or banned from app stores in the US. A law, by the way, that passed the House 352 to 65. And it's worth talking about the government's two main concerns here: the data TikTok is collecting from its users and the power it has to push content to them. And let's start with the data. TikTok is powered by an algorithm that tracks things like what videos you skip past and which you linger on. That way it can quickly figure out exactly what you like and feed you more of the same thing over and over again. Not unlike a doting grandmother or Marvel Studios. Sometimes people are genuinely weirded out by how perceptive TikTok's algorithm can be, because it can seem to know you better than you might know yourself.
I downloaded this app a year ago. I thought I was straight. After being on TikTok, I quickly realized I was not straight and that I was bisexual.
I always say that the algorithm knew that I was gay before I did, and I stand by that. It absolutely knew.
Are any other girls, like, kind of aggravated that it took more than 20 years to figure out we were bisexual, but it took my TikTok algorithm, like, 37 seconds? Would it save me so much fucking time?
Yeah, TikTok is speedrunning people's sexual awakenings. Before, a revelation like that might have taken years of therapy or an entire episode of Xena Warrior Princess. I honestly don't think a machine has been responsible for more sexual awakening since the Iron Giant, and I'm not explaining myself to you about that. I'm not doing it. He's an objectively hot robot. He's tall, has kind eyes, is great with kids, and I'm sure has a vibrate setting. Don't be weird about this. You're being weird. The algorithm is incredibly powerful because you're constantly feeding it new data. Every interaction you have with a video trains it more on your preferences, and because those videos are so short, it can gather a lot of data about you very quickly. But that is not all the information it gathers. It knows the device that you're using, your location, IP address, search history, the content of your messages, what you're viewing and for how long. It also infers factors such as your age range, gender and interests. And in the US, its own privacy policy says it may collect biometric information, including face and voice prints, from any content you post. That is a lot of personal information. And some of TikTok's critics paint an alarming picture of what that means.
Imagine you woke up tomorrow morning and you saw a news report that China had distributed 100 million sensors around the United States, and that any time an American walked past one of these sensors, this sensor automatically collected off of your phone your name, your home address, your personal network, who you're friends with, your online viewing habits, and a whole host of other pieces of information. Well, that's precisely what TikTok is.
Yeah, that's a scary-sounding message, only slightly undercut by the fact that guy's name is, and this is true, Klon Kitchen, which sounds less like a name to trust and more like a startup trying to disrupt the spatula space. Basically, the concern is that all this data could one day be used by the Chinese government to identify intelligence opportunities, for example, by helping China uncover the vices, predilections or pressure points of a potential spy recruit or blackmail target. And I mean, maybe? I guess there's a non-zero chance a future US president is currently running a fan account devoted to Sonic the Hedgehog's feet, which could be weaponised against them in the future, though it is worth noting a huge component of blackmail requires shame. And if you're not on TikTok, you are missing out on just how little shame its users have. There is an entire challenge that just consists of naming your biggest traumas for all the world to hear while dumping candy into a bowl, and it is riveting. And look, I'm not saying ByteDance hasn't been guilty of alarming privacy violations. It has. A few years back, this reporter was investigating TikTok and ByteDance only to learn that she was being investigated herself.
After I wrote my first few stories, I got a big leak from inside the company. Someone inside the company gave me a bunch of audio recordings.
In an effort to discover the leak, a team of ByteDance employees launched a surveillance project called Project Raven, pulling information from Emily's personal TikTok account to monitor her IP address.
And the theory was that if they could match my IP address to the IP address of one of their employees, they could maybe place me and an employee at a Starbucks or at a library at the same time, and then maybe figure out who was talking to me.
Yeah, if they knew one of their employees had been in the same location as that journalist, it'd be a pretty big clue. And it was much easier to pull IP addresses than go through every Starbucks dumpster to try and find the cup that said secret whistleblower. Now, I have to tell you, the company says the employees involved in that surveillance scheme were fired, and it's restructured the team in charge of internal audits and removed access to US data. But critics point out it doesn't really matter how good ByteDance's public intentions are, because fundamentally they're vulnerable to the whims of the Chinese government, which has shown a clear willingness to go after American data. Officials have blamed Chinese hackers for breaches of the Office of Personnel Management, Anthem Health and Equifax, among others. And if China wanted to pressure ByteDance to do something for it, the company wouldn't be able to put up much of a fight.
Chinese law says that if the Chinese government asks a company to cooperate, it has no choice. No appeal, no going to court, no laying across the railroad tracks. And so ByteDance, they could be perfectly innocent today. And if Xi Jinping wakes up in a bad mood tomorrow, they could be doing something bad.
Yeah, again, that sounds bad. Major decisions that affect millions of people could hinge on whether or not the leader of a country wakes up in a bad mood. It's the kind of unpredictable, emotionally volatile leadership you get in China and, luckily, nowhere else. And while that does sound frightening, it's important to note that there's also a lot of if in how this tends to get discussed. TikTok insists it hasn't and wouldn't give data to China, but whether or not you believe them, there is still no public evidence the Chinese government has actually spied on people through TikTok. What's more, while it does collect a lot of data on its users, as we discussed in our Data Brokers story, lots of other apps do the exact same thing. In fact, when the Washington Post worked with a privacy researcher to look under the hood at TikTok, they concluded that it doesn't appear to collect any more data than your typical mainstream social network. For instance, while TikTok is tracking users around the internet even when they aren't using the app, the same tracking tool is used by Meta and Google on a far larger scale. And even when it comes to tracking reporters, TikTok is not an outlier, given an Uber executive once used an internal tool named Godview to track the location of a BuzzFeed news reporter who was covering the company. And again, I am not giving TikTok a pass here. I'm just pointing out that its behaviour is pretty consistent with Silicon Valley's own very shitty standards. Think of TikTok as a soft drink company in the 1800s. Sure, its product is mostly cocaine, but hey, show me a child's beverage that isn't. So, that is the case as it relates to TikTok's usage of data. But what about the claim that it can push propaganda or bury content that makes China look bad? Well, ByteDance does do that within China. Douyin, the version of TikTok for the Chinese market, has to play by China's rules when it comes to censorship and has banned a broad range of supposedly subversive topics, including any content that causes discomfort. And when TikTok first started growing internationally, it did seem to bring some of that ethos with it. In 2019, leaked documents show TikTok had instructed moderators to ban content on highly controversial topics, citing mentions of Tiananmen Square, Tibetan independence, or the banned religious group Falun Gong as examples. And in 2020, The Intercept reported its moderators were also told to censor political speech in live streams, as well as, fun fact, users deemed too ugly, poor, or disabled for the platform. Now, TikTok insists those were old guidelines, no longer in use, and that their moderation practices are now more transparent. But some researchers believe there is still reason to worry here. One team studying TikTok created fake accounts representing American teenagers, and they were alarmed at what they found.
When I go to YouTube, you put in Tiananmen, and the first thing you have are mainstream news documentaries.
But researchers say most of the content regarding Tiananmen that showed up on TikTok was, in their judgment, not relevant or pro-China compared to what showed up on Instagram and YouTube.
When we looked at material that's sensitive to the Chinese Communist Party, these materials were significantly, inexplicably underrepresented on the platform.
Right, they concluded that videos undesirable to the CCP were underrepresented, though interestingly, not unrepresented. TikTok says that study is flawed, and while I hate to agree with them, the methodology is a bit weird because the researchers searched words like Xinjiang, Tibet, and Tiananmen, clicked on the first result, and let the algorithm take it from there, which doesn't seem like how people tend to search for information. If you just type in America and search, it is going to leave out a lot. And honestly, given how spookily good TikTok's algorithm is at knowing exactly what you want, it might even have concluded, got it, you're a bearded researcher pretending to be a 16-year-old looking for evidence to support your censorship hypothesis. Here are the results that deep down you want. Also, fun fact, you're bi. Ultimately, it is hard to know for sure, though, because the algorithm is proprietary and the decisions it makes about content are largely opaque. And banning TikTok out of fear it may be a vessel for foreign influence is a little weird for a few reasons. First, China, like many countries, including the US, has covert influence operations like accounts pushing propaganda running on all sorts of platforms. And researchers say they haven't seen a particular focus on TikTok that goes beyond the ones it also runs on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And when it comes to China directly influencing TikTok behind the scenes, even the government's own filings say point blank that they have no direct evidence China has used TikTok for propaganda purposes in the US, but there is significant risk that it could happen. But as long as this argument is about what could be the case, we should probably ask, could there be any ulterior motives behind the US government's approach here? Because alongside the concern about national security, it does feel like there can be an undercurrent of xenophobia. Here is Tom Cotton interrogating TikTok's CEO.
You said today, as you often say, that you live in Singapore. Of what nation are you a citizen?
Singapore.
Are you a citizen of any other nation?
No, Senator.
Have you ever applied for Chinese citizenship?
Senator, I served my nation in Singapore. No, I did not.
Do you have a Singaporean passport?
Yes, and I served my military for two and a half years in Singapore.
Do you have any other passports from any other nations?
No, Senator.
Your wife is an American citizen. Your children are American citizens.
That's correct.
Have you ever applied for American citizenship?
No, not yet.
Okay. Have you ever been a member of the Chinese Communist Party?
Senator, I'm Singaporean. No.
Have you ever been associated or affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party?
No, Senator. Again, okay. I'm Singaporean.
That is so bad. I almost wish that line of questioning had kept going. OK, but do you know where China is on a map? Yes. Yes, Senator, I do. How do you know where China is? What do you mean? I'll say it again. How do you know where China is? Because I can read a map. And how can you read a map? Because I learned to in school. And what kind of school would teach a child to read a map of China? Any school? Not any of ours. Well, that's not great, is it? So you're insulting the USA because you're a secret Chinese citizen. I rest my case. And look, obviously, Tom Cotton is a persistent piece of shit, but it is hard to shake the feeling that at least part of the panic here stems from an ugly place. And that's not the only possible motivator. There's also the fact that there are plenty of big US tech companies that would very much like their market share back from TikTok. Meta and YouTube now each have their own TikTok knockoffs in the forms of Reels and YouTube Shorts, and Meta's been caught openly seeding negative stories about TikTok, even hiring a marketing firm with one campaign director saying in an email, the dream would be to get stories with headlines like, from dances to danger. Which, to be honest, sounds like a Netflix true crime documentary about a ballet studio that turned out to be a sex cult. And Mark Zuckerberg, seen here looking like the chef from Ratatouille trying to pivot to Bitcoin, personally lobbied Trump on the risk posed by his competition. In 2019, in a private dinner at the White House, he made the case that the rise of Chinese internet companies threatens American business and should be a bigger concern than reining in Facebook, which seems a little suspect to me. If you get caught shoplifting, the best defence isn't usually, hey, that guy did it too and he's Chinese. And honestly, banning TikTok might be the only thing that helps Meta here, because as some TikTok creators will tell you, they much prefer the platform to its US competitors.
100% of my customer base were derived directly from TikTok. For instance, there was a gentleman that saw one of my TikTok videos just yesterday, and he saw a couple cows in the background that he really, really liked. He reached out to me and he said, "Are those cows for sale by chance?" He did not see those cattle on Facebook or Instagram. Let's face it, Facebook is archaic, it's dead. Instagram's prime was more than 7 years ago. This is the #1 platform in the world right now, and this is where a number of our customers are coming from.
Wow, there is no way to undersell how completely cooked you are as a tech company when that guy is telling you you're behind the times. He looks like his #1 concern is rustlers, and concerns 2 through 7 are all Stampede related. So if he's explaining why your social media platform is substandard, you are done. Goodbye. So very basically, that is the case pro and con for this potential TikTok ban, or at least the public case. Because there is one more element to the government's argument I haven't talked about yet, but only because it's basically impossible to do that, as they won't tell us what it is. There is a line that keeps coming up with lawmakers whenever they are advocating for this ban.
Is there concrete evidence that we can point to that says that nefarious activity is going on?
Yes, a lot of it is classified.
TikTok is certainly a national security threat. We've seen evidence in a classified setting.
Many Americans, particularly young Americans, are rightfully skeptical. At the end of the day, they've not seen what Congress has seen. They've not been in the classified briefings that Congress has held.
And here's the thing about that. Right. We haven't seen it. So maybe you need to show it to us. Because saying, trust us, it's super scary, only really works when the person saying it is someone you fundamentally trust in the first place. TikTok is currently suing the government over the impending ban, and in its filings, the government's redacted significant portions of the evidence it says it has, with some parts of its affidavits looking like this. And incredibly, even ByteDance and TikTok don't know what's behind those black bars because the government's not revealing its evidence to them either, which feels wrong. Because usually showing your evidence is a fundamental tenet of American justice. It's right up there with a right to plead your case and to be tried by 12 half-asleep strangers who'd rather be anywhere else in the world right now. And the condescension of just trust us can get really frustrating, especially when it's expressed like this.
I think it's important to recognize we're actually doing this to protect the privacy of Americans. People feel like they're taking their rights away, but it's actually protecting their privacy.
But is it, though? Because in a world where Instagram knows your location, Uber knows your childhood fears, and DoorDash has a detailed 3D rendering of your small intestine its executives use as a screensaver, claiming you're protecting Americans' privacy by banning TikTok feels like claiming you're fighting climate change by banning the Kia Sorento. Sure, I mean, it's technically not nothing, but it is, in a larger sense, basically nothing. One of the reasons this story is difficult to navigate is there is so much we don't know, and coming from two sides I don't remotely trust. Because you're either taking the word of a multinational tech company that profits off your data, or the US government, which seems more than happy to turn a blind eye whenever American companies do the exact same thing. And who knows where things could go from here? TikTok's lawsuit may end up before the Supreme Court, meaning that January 19th deadline will likely get extended into the Trump presidency. And remember, he's the one who tried banning TikTok in the first place, though he's now done a complete 180 on that, releasing this video during the campaign.
For all of those that want to save TikTok in America, vote for Trump. The other side's closing it up. But I'm now a big star on TikTok. So if you like TikTok, go out and vote for Trump.
I mean, it's perfect. As always, it is genuinely hard to focus on the message there because of the weird energy that he's projecting. His delivery is giving, OK, now how about a silly one, mixed with the spontaneous delayed release of 60 years of diet pills. So, apparently, Trump wants to save TikTok now either by getting Congress to repeal the ban or undermining it some other way. Although he could very well just change his mind again, he has been known to do that. So where does that leave the rest of us? Well, I don't know. We talked to a lot of experts on both sides of this ban. National security types tend to be in the why risk it, just ban it camp, while those in the tech policy space are more concerned about whether the benefits of that would outweigh the free speech implications of banning a massive platform. And I'm slightly torn. This show has an account on TikTok. I personally do not have it on my phone, partly because I don't trust it, mostly because I am very old. But if there's one thing many experts do agree on, it's that the risks to Americans' data online in no way end with China or TikTok. As one puts it, TikTok represents maybe 2% of the problem when it comes to Americans' privacy, adding that without adequate privacy law, there are millions of apps that are collecting and abusing Americans' data. And frustratingly, there is just no good reason why we don't have better protections. The US is the only country in the G20 that doesn't have some kind of comprehensive privacy law protecting consumer data. We've been behind the rest of the world on this issue for an embarrassingly long time. There was actually an effort to shore things up earlier this year called the American Privacy Rights Act, which contained robust data protections like the requirement that companies minimise the amount of data they collect so that the onus is on them to collect less and not on us having to play constant defence with a million different opt-outs. Unfortunately, it was stripped of some of its most crucial parts and support for it eventually evaporated. But we badly need something like it, just for a baseline level of protection here. I guess what I'm saying is, this TikTok ban ultimately may not even be necessary, but it definitely isn't sufficient. Or to summarise all of this, the only way anyone on TikTok can seem to internalise, that is, while watching someone make fancy chocolates or dancing. If we really want to better protect Americans and their data, that's great. That's a penis, by the way. But you don't just do that by banning one company. That's a chocolate penis with ridges around it. You do that by putting in actual guardrails that would apply to all of them. Oh, it's a screw. Oh, yeah, it's totally a screw. Oh, you know what? It's a robot penis. It's a chocolate robot penis. You know what? Hit it. And now, this